printers. It was quite a long time ago that Bill Gates got up and told everyone about the paperless office, something that he envisioned would be well and truly entrenched in our lives by now. Unfortunately, that hasn't yet happened. Printing on paper is still a favourite pastime of many people, and it looks to stay that way for quite a while. In Windows Vista, things haven't changed all that much from earlier versions of Windows, and like with the previous operating systems, Vista supports a wide variety of print devices. Now, before we even get going and start configuring Vista to handle our printers, it's important to understand the distinction between printers and print devices. When Microsoft refer to a printer, they're really talking about software, the print driver that communicates with the physical printer. When Microsoft are talking about the physical printer, you know that ugly box in the corner of the room that spits out the paper? That's what Microsoft refer to as the print device. So with those two definitions in mind, there are two types of print devices: locally attached printers and networkable printers. A local printer is the type that you plug directly into your Vista computer, and in most cases nowadays they'll be connected using a USB cable, but there are still people around using older parallel and even serial cables to connect their printers. A network print device, on the other hand, is connected to the network itself, plugged into a hub or a switch, and contains a print server that can communicate over the network using TCP/IP. And an example of this would be an HP printer that has a JetDirect card, which is basically just its own network card. So it's going to plug straight into a hub or a switch, and you can allocate it a static IP address or use DHCP to get an address, and you'll communicate with the printer over the network. But the truth is, nowadays, printers can also be connected via Bluetooth, wireless, and even over the internet, but they all really fall under the broad heading of network printers. So every physical printer that you have connected to Windows Vista, whether it's locally attached or networkable, is represented as a logical printer within Windows. And a logical printer defines the characteristics of the printer itself, and it's made up of the driver, the printer settings, and other properties that control how Vista communicates with the physical print device. So to add a printer, we'll simply click on Start, and we'll open up the control panel, and under our green Hardware and Sound heading here, we'll choose Printer. As you can see, we've got two printers currently defined. We've got a fax and the Microsoft XPS document writer. Now, I'm sure you all know what a fax is, but this XPS document writer might be foreign to you. XPS is basically Microsoft's answer to PDF files. When you print from any application that supports printing, you can save the file as an XPS file, which is really only an XML file, which you can then email, save, print, and manipulate it just as you would any other file. Now, the upside to using this format to save your documents in is that for printers that support XPS, the file can simply be printed without it first having to be converted to any printer-specific language, which at least in theory means that the resulting print should be better, since there's no conversion happening in the background, which can often result in your printout not looking the same as what you see on the screen. Now, it's also important to realize that these XPS files are really just zip files with a bunch of files inside it. So let's test it out. So we'll go and click on Start, and we'll just type in Note and launch Notepad here, and we'll just add in some text. This is some text. And then we'll choose File and Print. Okay, and our XPS document writer is already the default printer, so we'll click Print. And since we're actually saving a file here and not actually printing the document to a real printer, we'll give this a name of Test, and we'll click Save. Alright, now let's close Notepad because we don't need it anymore, and we won't save the changes. And we'll go back and we'll open up our Documents folder. There's our Test XPS file, and if we double click on it firstly, you can see here our file's going to open by default in Internet Explorer, and from here we can save it, we can print it to a real printer, and so on. Alright, well, let's go back to Windows Explorer, and if we hold down the Alt key on our keyboard and select the Tools menu and choose Folder Options. Then we'll select the View tab, and we'll deselect this box here to hide extensions for known file types, and we'll click on OK. Now we can see the file extension of .xps, so let's select our file. We'll hit F2 on our keyboard to rename it, and I'm just going to change the file extension to a zip file. And we'll say yes, we do want to change the file name extension. Okay, now you can see it is a zip file, and if we double click on this file, you can see that it is in fact really only a zip file with a bunch of files inside it. Files which make up and build the actual document. And inside this zip archive, you're going to find XML files, digital rights information, and any fonts and images that you've used in your document. And since these files are all contained within the XPS file, a standard which Microsoft has released under a royalty-free patent license, this means that all printers that support this XPS format should be able to print the file exactly as it was intended without losing quality, as would normally be the case when you convert it. Okay, so back in our printers folder, to add a new printer, we can right-click and then choose Add Printer, or we can do the same from the menu up the top here. Alright, so is the printer that we want to add a locally attached printer, or is it a network, wireless, or Bluetooth printer? Now do take note though that if your printer is a USB printer, you can see this message up here, you don't need to go through this interface, since a USB printer will automatically be detected by Vista. So this option here is really only for printers that are connected by connections such as a parallel or serial port. Now in my case, I don't actually have a local printer attached, but that really doesn't matter, we can still add one in anyway. So I'm going to choose the first option here, a locally attached printer. And from this drop-down list here, we can choose which port our printer is connected to. Now in most cases with legacy devices, it's going to be the first one here, an LPT1 port, a parallel port. So I'm going to select that, but we can also create our own port if we like. And if we select this option, we can choose to create a TCP/IP port that we can use so our users can connect over the network and print to our new printer. Alright, but I'm going to use an existing port of LPT1 and we'll click Next. Alright, now you can run through this list of manufacturers we have here on the left-hand side and then locate the printer model that you have. But if it doesn't appear in this list, and you do have drivers available on a CD or you've downloaded them from the web somewhere, you can click on this Have Disk button, and then you can simply browse to where you have the drivers stored. Now since I don't have a local printer attached, I'm going to accept the default printer here of an Apollo P1200, whatever that is, and we'll click Next. And we can then assign this printer a name. Now the default name here of Apollo P1200 is fine by me, and we can choose to make this a default printer, and that'll be selected automatically when we then print from any application. Now I'm going to uncheck this box since our printer here doesn't really exist, and we'll click Next, and then our printer will be installed. So we've successfully added our new printer, and we can print a test page if we like, and that's probably a good idea to ensure that your printer is working properly, but I'm not going to bother with that because obviously my printer doesn't exist, and we'll just click Finish. And up the top here we can see our new printer. Alright, well let's go and run through that wizard one more time, and this time I'll add in a printer I do actually have here in the building, and it does actually exist, so we'll choose Add a Printer, and this time we'll choose the second option and we'll add in a network printer. Okay, it's already found our printer here, which is a Color LaserJet 5500 at this IP address of 10.0.0.10. So we'll select that and we'll click Next. And then Windows is going to attempt to contact the printer to make sure everything's okay. And as before, we can assign this printer a name, and I'll accept the default name here. And again, we can choose to set this printer as the default printer that will be selected automatically when we print from any application. Now I'm just going to leave that and we'll click Next, and then our printer will be installed. Now like before, we could also print a test page if we like. We won't bother with that. We'll just click Finish. And there we can see our new HP Color LaserJet 5500 printer. Now, even though we chose not to make this printer the default, and you can see by this green tick here over the XPS document writer that it's the default printer, if we do want to make another printer the default one, we can simply right-click on it and then choose to set that one as the default printer. Alright, now let's go and take a look at some of the printer options we have with our printer. So we're going to right-click on our HP printer here, and at the bottom we'll select Properties. One thing I will point out before we get too far into this topic is that you'll probably find that some of your printer properties and configuration options that we look at over these next few pages will be slightly different to mine, since different printers and different driver versions are likely to have different options. So whilst most of the tabs you'll see will be the same, some of the options will be specific to your printer, and because of that, you're going to see some different settings. Now on our General tab here, you're going to see some basic information about your printer. The name, which was automatically populated when we first installed the printer, but the location and the comments fields are not. Now, if you're installing printers into an enterprise, I'd certainly recommend making use of these two fields here, especially the location field, as they can assist you in finding printers later on. But in order to fully use the location feature, you'll need to enable printer location tracking in Group Policy. And if you take a look at the printers video from our Windows Server 2003 product, you're going to see how to configure printer location tracking. Now down the bottom here you can see our printer model and some specific information about its capabilities. And if we click on the Printing Preferences button, we can set options such as the paper size, the tray that we'll be pulling the paper from, and we can also choose what type of media we'll be printing on, whether that be standard plain paper, paper that has a letterhead on it, transparencies, even cards and glossy paper. And over on the right here, if we click this image, we can set whether we want to use landscape or portrait printing. And at the bottom here, we can see what DPI we'll be printing in. So with my HP printer here, it's set to 600 DPI, but I'm able to change that down to 300. Now on the Advanced tab, here we can set things like how many pages we'd like to print, and other specific options that are generally going to be different depending on what type of printer you have. Now the Effects tab lets us specify options to resize our printout so it can be printed either smaller, and if you'll see this little graphic here change, or larger than the page, and we can also set a watermark to be printed if we like. Now the Finishing tab will allow us to print on both sides of the paper, and that's referred to as duplex printing, but of course many home printers don't support duplexing. Now on the Job Storage tab, you won't likely see this on a home printer, as this setting allows you to save the job on the printer itself, so it's there to be printed later on if you like. But this does default to off. And finally, we have a Services tab, and for my HP printer here, this just provides some links to places on the internet I can go to download drivers, access the product manuals, and get some help if I'm having problems. Okay, back on the properties of our printer here, the next tab we have is the Sharing tab, and this allows us to share our printer just like we would for sharing files and folders. So if we click on the Change Sharing Options button, and then click Continue on our user account control message, we can now choose to share this printer. Now you can change the share name if you like, and down the bottom if we click on the Additional Drivers button, people that connect to your computer to access this printer will be able to download the drivers from you, and by default it'll allow any x86 style computer to connect, which means that older Windows operating systems should be able to print to this printer without any dramas. But if you have an Itanium or a 64-bit Windows computer that would like to use this printer, you can check these boxes to allow it. And let's say for argument's sake that I've got another computer here, a 64-bit version of Vista. If I check this box and then click on OK, Since the drivers for 64-bit Vista aren't installed on my computer, we'll be prompted to browse to a location where they are so we can install them on this computer. That way, when another person uses our shared printer and they have a 64-bit operating system, they can then download the correct drivers. Now on the Ports tab, here is where you can set the port that the printer communicates through. Now if the printer is a local printer, you'd normally expect to see the printer connected to the LPT or USB port, but since this is a network printer, we can see that our printer here is using a TCP/IP port to communicate on. Now below our ports, we've got two checkboxes here. The first, enable bidirectional support, simply means that the printer communicates both ways between the client and the printer. So you can see the status of print jobs, for example, although on my printer here, this one's grayed out for me. The enable printer pooling checkbox, which is disabled by default, enables you to set up one logical print device for multiple printers. So let's assume for the moment that I have two physical Hewlett-Packard printers attached to my computer. What this box enables me to do is to select the two printers up here in the list and have my computer send its print jobs to one logical printer. This enables me to use the two physical printers to share the printing load. And that's really useful in a corporate environment, especially when a user starts running their monthly 1,000-page report, which prevents everyone else from using the printer. Automatically the other printer can kick in and start printing everyone else's jobs. Now to be able to use printer pooling though, you obviously need to have two printers that can use the same printer driver, so typically this means that you need to have two identical physical printers with the same amount of memory installed. But of course, on a client operating system like Vista, you probably wouldn't be using an option like this, but it is there just in case you have the luxury of having two of the same printers. Now on the Advanced tab, we have options that allow us to control access to our printer based on the time of day, although the default is to make this printer always available, and we can set a priority on the printer traffic. Now what this means is we can set up two logical printers and have them point to this one physical printer and then set up different priorities for different people. So let's go and set it up so you understand what I'm talking about. I'm just going to close this for now. And I'm just going to select my Hewlett-Packard printer here, and for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to right-click on it and choose to rename it. And I'm going to call this one My HP. Alright, now let's go and add in a second printer. So we'll right-click and we'll choose Add Printer. Again, we'll choose a network printer. And we'll choose our HP printer again and we'll click Next. And since the driver is already on our system, we'll leave the default option here to use the current driver and we'll click Next. And now for the name of this printer, I'm going to call this one Other People. And again, we'll click Next. And then Finish. Okay, now you can see the two printers that we've configured on our Vista computer, my Hewlett-Packard and the one for Other People. Now obviously these two logical printers really point to the same physical printer, but the purpose of having two of them is that we can now assign them priorities. So now, if I right-click on my HP printer and select Properties, and then the Advanced tab, we could now set the priority of this printer to 2. And that means that if a print job is sent to this printer, at the same time a job is sent to the other people's printer, then my print job will print first as it has a higher priority. So remember, the higher the number here, the higher the print priority. Now obviously if I want to be truly selfish and ensure that no one connects to my Hewlett-Packard printer, then I could choose not to share it so that I'm the only one that can use it, and then I can share out the printer I've called Other People and let them use that one. So that way my prints are always going to take priority. Now in a home environment, you probably wouldn't bother with setting up options like this, but in a corporate environment, it's a good idea and one which will definitely please managers no end when they have the priority over us little folks. And as you've seen, it only takes a few seconds to configure. Okay, well the other options we have here is to change the driver being used by selecting another one from this drop-down box here. We can see the default is to spool our documents first, which will make your program, such as Microsoft Word, finish its printing process faster without having to wait for the printer to finish. Now we can choose to start printing after the entire document has been spooled, or to start printing immediately, which is the default. Now if you don't want to spool any documents at all, we can also print directly to the printer. Now the Hold Mismatched Document setting simply allows you to hold documents that have been printed using settings that differ from what you see here. For example, when I hit print in an application, let's say Word, and I choose to print it in duplex mode, but I've configured the printer to not use duplex, then if I activate this setting, it's going to hold on to the document as those settings are mismatched. The next option here, to print spooled documents first, will do what it says, and it's going to print documents that have already been spooled before new documents, regardless of what priority has been set up here. So if a regular user on our lower priority printer has already spooled their document for printing, and along comes me on my HP with our higher priority printer, and I send off my print job, then the other user's document that's already been spooled will still print first. Now we could choose to keep printed documents rather than deleting them once they've been printed, and we can also enable advanced printing features for this printer if the printer supports them. Now we can set the printer defaults, such as our portrait and landscape options, and what sort of paper we've used, and we've already seen that. The Print Processor button allows us to select which print processor we'd like to use when printing our documents, and we can choose from RAW, EMF, and text. And it's unlikely that you're ever going to come in here and change these, but obviously you can if you like. And RAW here is the default for my printer, which simply means that the print job that's sent off to the printer will be formatted for a specific device, in my case, a Hewlett-Packard printer. Now if you want to print a separator page so it makes identifying where a print job finishes and where the next job begins, you can click on this separator page button and then browse to a location where you have a separator page stored. Now obviously, whilst a separator page does waste an additional piece of paper every time you print, it does make it easier to locate your print job when lots of people print things and never collect them off the printer. So you do have that option. Now on the Security tab, we can control access to our printer via permissions. Now it's important to understand that by default, everyone can print to your printer, but the creator owner, which is the user that sent the print job, can also manage their own print jobs. So once a regular user sends a print job, they then become the creator owner and they have permission to manage their own jobs. However, members of the Everyone group, and that is everyone, cannot manage the print jobs of another user unless they are a member of the administrators group. So if I didn't want other people to print to this printer, which is my Hewlett-Packard printer, then I could either select my Everyone group here and uncheck the print option, or I could just remove the Everyone group altogether. Now finally, on our Device Settings tab, we can set options specific to our device, and this tab's certainly going to differ depending on what sort of printer you have installed. So here you're generally going to have options such as what type of paper you're going to be using, such as A4 or letter or so on, and also things like if you have duplex available to be able to print on both sides of the page, the amount of memory you have installed, and so on. Alright, well we'll cancel this for now, and we'll right click in our printers window, and notice that we have a Server Properties option at the bottom. Now if we select this Run as Administrator flyout window here, notice that we also have the same option here. Now the difference is, if we select this bottom one, we won't be able to make changes to our server properties. Practically everything will be grayed out. So if you are planning on making changes to the server properties, we'll need to use this administrator one. So we'll choose Run as Administrator and we'll fire up the server properties here, and then we'll click Continue on our user account control message. And from here we'll be able to set up forms which are used to define the standard sizes for our paper, envelopes and transparencies. Now you're going to see a whole bunch of standard international sizes for things like A4 and A3 and letter and so on. But if you have some specific size stationery that you want to use for your company and it is a unique size, well then you can configure that here. So we'll click on the Create a New Form button and then choose either metric centimeters or English inches and then set the width and the height of the stationery as well as your default margins, and then simply give it a name and then click on OK. Now on the Ports tab, we can also add, delete and configure our ports on our computer. We can also configure the drivers we have installed on this computer, and of course here we can see all of the drivers we have on our Vista computer, not just ones for a specific printer. Now on the Advanced tab, we can see the default path of our printer spooler, which is under our System32 directory. Now we can change that if we like, but bear in mind that if we do change it, just ensure that we also change the permissions on the new path, so that way everyone can't just get in there and start deleting things. Now these first three checkboxes here simply log printing errors, warnings and informational events to our Windows event log. Beep on error of remote documents will display one of those balloon-style warning pop-ups when a document fails to print, so it's going to alert you that your print job failed. And we can show informational notifications for local printers, and that's going to display the status of our print jobs that have been sent to our printer by any local users. And finally, we can do the same for network printers as well. Now I know we're producing a video on printers, but if I was to print something here, you guys listening to this video wouldn't even be able to see it. But still, let's go and we'll print a document anyway. So I'm going to click on Start and I'm just going to type in Word and hit Enter, and that's going to load up WordPad. So we'll go and click on the File menu and we'll choose Print. And I'm just going to print the current document, which doesn't contain anything, but that's okay. And I'm going to print it to this Apollo printer here since it doesn't exist. That way it's going to stay around longer for us to see something in the print queue. Alright, so we'll click Print. And you can see this printer icon here appear in the system tray. And if you hover your mouse over it, you can see that we have one document pending. Now if we double click on this printer icon, here you'll see the printer queue containing our document, which is obviously errored due to the fact that I don't actually have a printer there. Now from here we could right click on our document, we could choose to pause the document from printing, we could restart the job, or we could cancel it entirely. Now if we select the Properties option, we can then view more information about our job, such as the size of the print job, who sent it, which in my case was the trainer account. We can also lower or raise the priority of the print job as well. So if this happens to be an important document, we could raise the priority so that it prints faster. Or if it was an end of month report that's a lot of pages and as such doesn't really have any major priority, we could lower the priority and choose to schedule it to print at a later time. Okay, well the next thing I want to talk about is internet printing. On a Windows 2003 server, you can configure internet printing so that you can print to a URL. And again, if you want to know more about it, check out the printers video from our Windows Server 2003 product. With Vista, you can of course print to an internet printer, and you basically add in the printer in much the same way that you would a regular network printer. So we'll right click again and we'll choose to add a printer, and again we'll choose a network printer. But this time we'll choose this bottom option, our printer isn't listed. And here we can simply enter in the URL to point to an internet printer. Now once you've clicked Next through this wizard, you'll be able to print to this printer. But let's consider the other side of the equation. What if you want to prevent people from using internet printers? Well, there's two ways that we can do this. The first is to disable internet printing from within Vista. So we'll click on Start, and we'll open up the control panel, and then we'll choose Programs, and then up the top we'll choose Turn Windows Features on or off. Alright, now we'll click Continue on our user account control message. And now we'll expand Print Services, and from here you can uncheck this box to disable the internet printing client. Okay, well the second method to disable this is to use group policy. So we'll click on Start, and we'll type in gpedit.msc, and we'll hit Enter, and then we'll click Continue on our user account control message. Okay, now at the top here, we'll expand our computer configuration and then Administrative Templates. And you might be forgiven for thinking that we're looking for printers here, but instead we're going to expand System, and then we'll expand Internet Communication Settings, and then select Internet Communication Settings below. And in the right-hand side, we can configure this policy to turn off printing over HTTP. So if we right-click on this policy and select Properties, and then we enable this setting, that's going to prevent users from accessing any internet printers. Now while we're here in our group policy editor, if we scroll back up to the top and then click on the printers folder, in the right you can see a whole bunch of policies that relate to printing, and I'm not going to go through them all here, but be aware that they are here and you can come in here in your own time and read through them if you like. Okay, well the final thing I want to talk about in this video is the performance of our printing. Now it's unlikely that you're going to want to monitor the performance of your printers at home, but in a corporate environment, especially if you're responsible for looking after the printers, you can set up performance monitoring so you know how your printers are going. So if we click on Start, and we'll type in REL, and at the top we'll launch the Reliability and Performance Monitor, and of course we'll click Continue on our user account control message. Now on the left we'll select Performance Monitor, and if we click on the green plus icon at the top here, in this window here, if we scroll up, here you can see we can monitor the performance of our print queue. Now firstly, at the top of this window here, we will need to choose which computer we want to monitor. So if it happens to be this one, you don't have to do anything since it does default to the local computer. But if it's a remote computer, we can click on the Browse button and then locate the computer that we want to manage. Okay, once you've selected the correct computer, if we click on this little down arrow on the right here, this is going to expand out the print queue list of objects that we have, and you can see that there are objects here for you to monitor things like print jobs, any errors, and if we scroll down a little bit more, you can see that there's even monitors we can use to check that there's paper in the printer. Now when you're monitoring printers, it's easy to forget that while these objects will monitor printer-specific things, what about the computer that the printer is connected to? So if we scroll down and then expand Process, some counters that you'd probably like to include in your monitoring would be this % processor time. And in the window below, if we scroll down and select Spools SV, which is the printer spooler service, we can then click on Add and monitor that, and this % processor time will then show us the percentage of time that's being consumed by the spooler service for printing. Now we can also add in the handle count object as well, and then we'll click on Add, and this handle count object will show us the number of handles that are opened by our print spooler process, and this is important for us to track as each open handle consumes resources on your computer. Now if the handle count value you get back from your monitoring seems excessively high, then it's likely that there's still probably open handles not being released from clients that are no longer actively printing. Okay, on the left here, if we scroll down a little bit more, We'll also choose to add in pool paged bytes, and that's going to show us the current number of bytes that are being used by our spooler process. Now, if we also add in the one above, pool non-paged bytes, the difference between these two is that non-paged bytes remain in memory and they're not written to disk, whereas paged pool bytes will be written to disk from memory. Now, I'd also recommend adding in the virtual bytes and even the virtual bytes peak objects as well, as these performance objects show the size in bytes of the virtual address space used by our print spooler. And finally at the top, I'd probably add in the page file bytes as well, and that'll show you how much of your page file is being used by the spooler service. Now, once you've added in all of the counters that you want to monitor, we'll click on OK, and then we'll be able to see the objects that we've added to our graph. And this will monitor the printer and the print queue in real time. But if it's a longer historical log that you're after, then you'll want to create a data collector set. And if you check out our video on maintaining and optimizing Windows Vista, you'll learn how to create data collector sets there. Again, a home user most likely won't ever bother monitoring printers, but in a corporate environment, you might like to set this monitoring up so your Vista computer can gather important performance data about your network printers. And it's amazing what sort of information you'll find out about your printers when you actively monitor what's going on. In this video, we've discussed printing within Windows Vista. I'd recommend that when you first install your printer, make sure you spend some time going through the options that are available with your printer, as you'll find there will be a lot of them. And don't forget to set the default page size for your printer as well, as most printers default to letter, but in some parts of the world the standard will be A4. Now finally, we talked about internet printing and the key things you'll need to consider when monitoring the performance of your printers. Managing your USB printers on Vista is a real easy plug-and-play process, but it can get considerably harder when you're managing network printers in a domain. So hopefully this video has brought you a little closer to mastering your printers on Windows Vista.